The Central Intelligence Agency is an institution built around not being seen. Its finished product is an absence. No fingerprint, no paper, no ship. And in the summer of 1974, it sent to sea the largest and most conspicuous object it has ever owned, 618 feet and 8 inches from bow to stern, 50,500 tons of steel light, built out in the open air at the Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Chester, Pennsylvania, with a billionaire's name painted along the side. The Hughes Glomar Explorer. Newspapers covered her launch. Sun held a family day in late October of 1972 and invited contractors and press to watch a tack-welded hull go into the Delaware River. Reporters were given tours. Trade journals printed her specifications. The cover story was deep ocean mining, potato-sized lumps of manganese and nickel and cobalt lying on the abyssal plain 3 miles down. And that story was published, promoted, and paid for out of the same budget as the ship. Underneath it, the job was this. On the 8th of March, 1968, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine went to the bottom of the North Pacific, roughly 1,560 nautical miles northwest of Hawaii, in 16,500 feet of water, with 98 men inside her. K-129, hull number 722. The agency intended to reach down 3 miles and pick her up. That is the contradiction the whole story turns on. To take something in total secrecy, the agency had to build something nobody could possibly miss, and then make certain that everybody looked at it. There was exactly one part of that ship nobody ever photographed: a hole in the bottom, 199 feet long, running clean through the hull, sealed at the keel by sliding doors. Everything else on the vessel existed to serve that hole. Subscribe now, because the letter signed on the 21st of May, 1975, is the part almost nobody tells. Everything the Hughes Glomar Explorer was built to do failed. The claw failed. The submarine broke in half in mid-water. The operation was blown, and the second attempt never sailed. And then on the 21st of May, 1975, an agency officer signed a short reply to a 25-year-old reporter from the Washington Bureau of Rolling Stone. 3 lines of typing. That has not failed. It is still working this morning, in Washington, and in Ottawa, and in federal court, and it is the last thing we will come to. Start with the failure that created the requirement, because it was not an American failure. K-129 sailed from Rybachi, the submarine base near Petropavlovsk, on the Kamchatka Peninsula shortly after midnight on the 24th of February 1968. She was a Project 629A boat, what the North Atlantic Treaty Organization called a Gulf II, diesel-electric, about 330 feet long, carrying 3 R-21 ballistic missiles in silos built into an extended sail. Her commander was Captain First Rank Vladimir Ivanovich Kobsa. She carried 98 men. The standard complement for the class was around 83, and no explanation for the extra 15 has ever been offered by the Soviet or Russian navies. It is one of several things about that patrol that nobody has cleared up. She made her test dive, radioed in, and went quiet. She was due to report again, crossing the 180th meridian. Nothing came. By the 3rd week of March, she was declared missing, and the Soviet Pacific Fleet put ships, aircraft, and submarines across an enormous stretch of the North Pacific looking for her. They found nothing at all. The United States Navy watched that search happen. Watching a fleet search tells you where a fleet thinks its submarine ought to be. And the American Listening Network had recorded an acoustic event in early March that fitted a hull collapsing. Cross the 2 and you get a box. The American submarine Halibut, a converted missile boat, went to that box towing a device the crews called the Fish, 12 feet long, 2 short tons, a package of cameras and strobe lights and sonar built to survive the pressure. On the 20th of August 1968, she found the wreck, and over the following weeks she took something in the region of 20,000 photographs of it. Hold that against each other. The Soviet Navy could not find its own submarine. The Americans had a photograph album of it. Now the man who had to lift it. In the summer of 1970, Curtis Crook, engineering vice president at Global Marine, sat down for coffee at a small restaurant near the company's office in Los Angeles with John Graham, the firm's chief naval architect. Graham was 55, trained at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and by most accounts the most capable man in any room he entered. The record of his early life is thin, and I would rather say that than fill it in. What is documented is what came out of his hands. Those hands had already built the thing that made this idea thinkable. Graham was the designer behind Global Marine's drill ships, including Glomar Challenger, roughly 400 feet long and able to drill in 20,000 feet of water, the vessel that carried out deep ocean scientific coring in the lineage that ran back to Project Mohole. That work taught him one specific and unglamorous skill, which was how to hold a ship motionless above a spot on the seabed 3 miles beneath it while lowering steel pipe down to it. That is not a salvage skill, it is a drilling skill, and it happened to be the entire problem. Crook told him how big the new ship would have to be. Graham worked in cigarette smoke on paper napkins with a slide rule because the computing of the day was not trusted for it. He pulled in the engineers he called affectionately his grunt engineers, among them Sherman Wetmore, who had been at Global Marine since 1961 and had worked as design engineer on all the important drill ships. Then the human friction, which is where these stories usually live. Graham was a recovering alcoholic, and his security clearance had to be worked through carefully by the agency officer running the program, John Parangoski, a man the engineers only ever called Mr. P, who had come off the Corona reconnaissance satellite. On their first trip to Langley, Graham and Crook were instructed to sign into their hotel as employees of a fictional company called Graham Pharmaceuticals. As David Sharp tells the story, neither shipbuilder could spell pharmaceuticals, and the people in the room who lost. Curtis Crook, the most experienced marine engineer in the entire program, was passed over for mission director in favor of a man reporting into the agency under an assumed name. There was friction, and it was not really about competence. It was about who owned the operation. A Navy captain named Chuck Richelieu was considered for a senior role, and by the recollection of the people around him, never wanted it. And John Graham was diagnosed with cancer in the autumn of 1973. He wrote a letter of resignation to his own staff. He never saw the ship work. In August of 1970, Richard Helms, as chairman of the United States Intelligence Board, wrote down exactly what he wanted taken off the bottom of the Pacific. Read the list: cryptographic equipment, a nuclear warhead, an R-21 missile, the navigation and fire control system, sonar and anti-submarine warfare countermeasures, and the documentation that went with all of it. Helms made recovery of that submarine the board's highest priority. The institutional path is documented. In April 1969, after 8 months of argument between the Navy, the Pentagon, and the agencies, the White House gave the Central Intelligence Agency the lead. In July 1970, the agency selected Global Marine's heavy lift ship concept over the alternatives. In October 1970, the program was authorized to proceed with hardware, and the authorizing decision rested on a finding worth pausing over, that no other asset could satisfy the requirement then or in the foreseeable future. Now read the requirement back, because it is not asking what it appears to ask. It looks like a salvage job. Salvage says bring up what is down there. This says something else entirely. Bring up 1,750 tons of torn steel, a section about 132 feet long, from 3 miles down, inside a weather window in the North Pacific that stays open from roughly mid-June to mid-August, while the people who own it are watching, and without them ever finding out. The recovery was never the hard part. The concealment was the specification, and everything expensive on the ship followed from it. There were other ideas, and they were not stupid. Generate gas underneath the hull and float her up. Cut her apart on the bottom and bring up the pieces that matter. Build a deep submersible and go down and take what you want by hand. Every one of those approaches was cheaper. Every one of them was rejected because none of them ended with the submarine inside something the Soviets could not see into. And then, the constraint everyone treated as fatal. A pipe string long enough to reach 16,000 feet has to carry its own weight before it carries anything else. In 1970, an agency task force put the maximum fail-safe load at 17,126 pounds and concluded that a pipe capable of taking it could not be manufactured. Not difficult, impossible. Curtis Crook argued them out of it. The pipe they said could not be made went to SE in 274 sections, each of them 60 feet long. So take the design apart, decision by decision, and notice that not one of them was an accident. The first trade was the grunt lift itself. Hang the whole thing off a column of pipe from a surface ship, rather than sending anything down to work autonomously. Chosen because Global Marine already understood pipe strings better than anyone alive. Paid for in a single point of failure. The load runs through one column, so a failure anywhere in it is a failure everywhere. Second, the pipe was tapered rather than uniform, thick at the top and thinner going down because the upper sections carry everything hanging below them. Paid for in cost, in complexity, and in a handling system that had to make up and break out sections in a strict order that could never be varied. Third, the beam. The ship was originally drawn at just under 106 feet across, sized deliberately to fit the 110-foot locks of the Panama Canal. The hydrodynamics said she would not be steady enough during pipe operations, so she was widened to 115 feet and 8.5 inches. That decision cost the United States the Panama Canal. She had to go around South America to reach the Pacific. It also cost a young naval architect named Chuck Cannon 6 weeks of refairing the bow and stern lines by hand. Fourth, the Claw. Lockheed built it, called it the capture vehicle, and the crews called it Clementine, after the miner 49er's daughter in the song, which is a joke about a mining ship that was not a mining ship. Roughly 180 feet long, 58 feet wide, weighing about 2,000 tons, with 8 great steel beams, davits, that would be driven underneath the wreck using water jets to cut through the sediment. The davits were made from Maraging 200 steel, chosen for strength and for lightness per unit of volume, paid for in ductility, remember that. And the Claw could never be seen going aboard, which produced its own trade. Clementine was built inside a submersible barge, Hughes Mining Barge 1, at Redwood City in California under a great oval roof put there to defeat overhead photography. In the spring of 1974, the barge went out to deep water off Catalina Island, sank herself, opened her roof underwater, and passed the capture vehicle up into the ship through the bottom of the hull. Nobody on the surface saw the two halves of the machine come together. The cost of that was a second enormous purpose-built structure, used essentially once. Fifth, the Hole. 199 feet of open keel in the middle of the ship, closable by sliding gates with docking legs to mate a 2,000-ton capture vehicle to the hull in a moving sea, and pumps to dewater the whole well once the doors were shut. Sources disagree on how wide it was, some saying 42 feet and some saying 74, and I cannot resolve that for you. The length is consistent everywhere. It was sized so that the widest part of a Gulf II submarine would fit inside it, out of the sky, with the doors closed over the top. Now stop, because there is one piece of physics here that makes everything else make sense. And it is worth doing in plain words. Pick up a length of steel pipe and hold it upright. Easy. Now imagine 16,000 feet of that pipe hanging straight down into the ocean. The pipe at the very top is not just holding the claw at the bottom, it is holding every single length of pipe underneath it as well. So the top has to be made thicker. Thicker means heavier. Heavier means the piece above that has to be thicker still. That is the first problem, and it is why the pipe is tapered. Here is the second problem, and it is worse. A ship on a swell goes up and down. If the pipe is bolted rigidly to the ship, then every time the ship rises, the entire column and everything hanging off it must rise instantly with her, and the load through the steel spikes by hundreds of tons in a second or two. Every time she drops, the load goes slack. Do that twice a minute for 8 days, and something breaks. So the pipe is not bolted to the ship. It hangs from a platform that stays level while the hull rolls underneath it, and from a set of enormous hydraulic rams that let the ship move up and down without the pipe ever knowing she did. The platform is called a gimbal. The rams are called a heave compensator. Those two systems are the reason this was possible at all, and they are why the ship had to be so large. She was not big to be impressive. She was big to be still. Which brings us to the thing everybody says about why it went wrong. As it is commonly told, Lockheed chose Maraging steel for the davits. Maraging steel is very strong but brittle, and so when the load came on, several of them snapped and 2/3 of the submarine fell back into the Pacific. That version is in reference works. It is repeated by people who worked on the project. There is real metallurgy behind it because Maraging steels do trade ductility for strength, and it is entirely believable. The documented picture is duller and more interesting. Lockheed's own designers argued afterwards that Maraging 200 would have been perfectly adequate if two other things had not happened. One, the procedures used to drive the davits under the target were more aggressive than they needed to be. 2, and this is the part that gets left out, the capture vehicle sat on the sea floor for close to 20 hours under compressive and twisting loads while the crew above repaired a heave compensator. Polmar and White's account concedes that in hindsight the steel might not have been the best choice, and then asks whether any steel would have come through those 20 hours intact. A participant writing in Naval History in December of 2025 put it flatly: it was a good choice. The truth sits somewhere in that smudge, and the 20 hours are the part almost nobody mentions. She sailed from Long Beach on the 20th of June, 1974, and arrived over the site on the 4th of July. 2 Soviet ships came out to watch her work. What follows is what happens when the thing built not to be seen is stared at for 6 weeks. The Soviet tug SB-10 stood off and observed. A second vessel came and went. The Glomar crew stacked crates on the helicopter deck so that nothing could land on it. Nobody boarded. Nobody asked the right question. Soviet High Command, by later accounts, had dismissed reports of an American salvage attempt at that depth as absurd, which it very nearly was. The claw reached the bottom on the 3rd of August, and the cameras showed the submarine exactly where Halibut had photographed her 6 years before. The lift began. Somewhere around 9,000 feet from the surface, the davits let go, the wreck tore apart under its own weight, and the larger portion went back down into the dark. The crew kept lifting what was left. The remaining section was secured inside the ship on the 8th of August, and recovery operations were completed the next day. What came up included submarine manuals, 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes, and the bodies of 6 Soviet submariners. They were given a formal military burial at sea, conducted in English and in Russian with both national anthems. The service was filmed. Now the part of the spread that nobody planned, which is that the LIE got loose. To make deep ocean mining credible, the agency funded research into its commercial viability, arranged technical meetings through cutouts, and generated press interest. It worked far too well. Other companies believed it. By 1978, 3 international consortia were testing nodule recovery in the Pacific, and Ocean Mining Associates reported that Deep Sea Miner 2, a converted 20,000-ton ore carrier, had raised manganese nodules from 3 miles down at 50 tons an hour. An industry that had been invented as camouflage acquired ships, budgets, and lobbyists. It also acquired a body of law. The prospect of seabed mineral wealth became a live argument at the 3rd United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, and the seabed regime written into the 1982 convention produced the International Seabed Authority based in Kingston, Jamaica, now 167 member states plus the European Commission, still arguing about the same rocks 50 years later. The ship herself went wandering into General Services Administration custody in 1976, transferred to the Navy for storage that September, leased out to Lockheed and Ocean Minerals Company, converted into a deep-water drill ship in the late 1990s under a 30-year lease from the Navy, registered at the end of her life in Port Vila, Vanuatu, under the call sign Yankee Juliet Quebec Quebec 3, and broken up in China in 2015. The floating crane built specifically to lift her 630-ton gimbal into place, the Sun 800, outlived her, and in 2024, renamed the Chesapeake 1000, it helped clear the wreckage of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. 2 small things from inside the program. The first, on the delivery voyage from Pennsylvania round to California, Chuck Cannon sailed as resident naval architect. Security confiscated his film. He had been photographing seabirds. The second is the collision, and it is the best fact in the story. In 1978 and 1979, under commercial lease, the Hughes Glomar Explorer went out into the Pacific and mined manganese nodules. For real. The cover story sailed out and did the job it had been invented to pretend to do. There is a nodule in a block of lucite in the Central Intelligence Agency Museum at Langley, 9 centimeters by 9 by 7.5, that the ship actually brought up. One more thing spread, and it spread wrong. The press got the name of the operation incorrect, and it never recovered. Jennifer was the security compartment, the handling channel for the paperwork. The operation was Azorian, and the word Azorian was pulled at random from a registry of code names precisely because it meant nothing at all. Roughly $800 million in the money of the day. More than a manned Apollo lunar mission. Set that against what the United States Navy had wanted to do instead. The Navy's answer was to go down rather than to lift up. Its Special Projects Office had proposed a deep submergent search vehicle with a 20,000-foot capability, a manned submersible that would descend to the wreck and take off the specific components the analysts wanted. Not the submarine, the code books, the crypto gear, the fire control. It would have cost a fraction of a purpose-built heavy-lift ship. Give that answer its full due because the Navy had already proved the competence. It was the Navy that found K-129 in the first place, with a converted attack boat and a towed camera sled when the Soviets with a whole fleet could not. The same lineage of technology went on to produce Operation Ivy Bells, the tapping of Soviet undersea communications cables which delivered years of intelligence for a very small fraction of $800 million. Norman Polmar's judgment is that never building the search vehicle was a real loss to American military and scientific capability in the deep ocean, and that reads as fair, and give the Central Intelligence Agency its due as well, because its case was not fantasy. The United States Intelligence Board revalidated the requirement on the 23rd of May 1974, stating that recovery would provide, in the language of the memorandum, information which can be obtained from no other source. That is a serious claim made in writing by people with access to the target list. But the real difference here was never technical. It was institutional, and Helms said the quiet part out loud in 1972. Arguing to continue, he pointed out that most of the money had already been spent, the ship was nearly launched, and that if the program were cancelled, the funds would simply be deleted by Congress rather than moved to anything else. That is the whole thing. A 600-foot ship is an object you can point at in a hearing. It has a launch date, a hull number, a photograph, and a constituency in Pennsylvania. A submersible that comes home with one code book is a line item. The agency had a program and the vocabulary to defend one. The Navy had a good idea. Who paid for the difference? The men who never got a deep submergent search capability, and, arguably, the analysts, because the surgical option was the only one that did not require lifting 1,750 tons through 3 miles of water in a single piece. So the ship sailed, and the davits broke, and most of the target went back to the bottom, which raises the question of what the operation actually produced. The answer is not on the ship, and it is not in the Pacific. The Secrecy did not fail because of Soviet intelligence. On the night of the 5th of June 1974, days before the Glomar Explorer sailed, burglars broke into a Howard Hughes office on Roman Street in Los Angeles and took, among other things, a memorandum linking Hughes to the agency and to the ship. Ordinary thieves, no tradecraft, no flag, no ideology. The agency, desperate to get the document back, called in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which called in the Los Angeles Police Department, and $1 million of federal money was floated as bait for the burglars. That is what drew the reporters, not the ship, the frantic search for a piece of paper about the ship. Los Angeles Times, the 7th of February, 1975, Jack Anderson on national radio on the 18th of March, Seymour Hersh across the front page of the New York Times the following morning. Project Matador, the return trip to collect the rest of the submarine, had been approved by President Ford on the 6th of February. It was dead within 6 weeks. And then, in the wake of the Hersh story, a 25-year-old reporter in Rolling Stone's Washington bureau named Harriet Ann Philippi filed a request under the Freedom of Information Act. Notice what she asked for, not the operation. She asked for the agency's records of its own efforts to talk journalists out of publishing. The agency was cornered. Confirm the records existed and you confirm the operation. Deny they existed and you lie in writing. So on the 21st of May, 1975, the agency answered that involvement by the United States government in the subject matter of her request could neither be confirmed nor denied, not a refusal to release documents, a refusal to say whether there were any. There was no statute permitting that. It did not exist in the Freedom of Information Act. The lawyers invented it on the spot. Philippi sued, lost in the district court, and appealed, and on the 23rd of December 1976, the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit recognized the response as legitimate in principle in Philippi against Central Intelligence Agency, 546 Federal Reporter, 2nd Series, page 1009. That is the Glomar response. It is used across the American federal government every working day. It has been imported into other countries. The agency's first message on Twitter in 2014 was a joke about it. In 2022, the Freedom of Information Act Advisory Committee formally recommended that agencies stop calling it GLOMAR on the grounds that an ordinary member of the public receiving such a letter has no idea what the word means, and the word itself is a fossil of a fossil. GLOMAR is a contraction of Global Marine, an oil field drilling contractor that had nothing whatever to do with information law and never asked to be its namesake. Read that again. The submarine is still on the bottom. The ship was cut up in a Chinese scrapyard. The Soviet Union is gone. The sentence is still working. The most durable thing the Hughes Glomar Explorer ever produced was a moon pool in the law, an official space where an answer ought to be, sealed at the keel. And from the outside, there is no way on Earth to tell whether there is anything inside it. The ship was not built to keep a secret. It was built to be one. And when it stopped being one, it left behind the machinery for making others. So this was never really a story about a submarine. Add it up. The grunt lift over the submersible, the pipe string over the gas bag, concealment over recovery, a ship anyone could photograph over a wreck nobody would ever see, and in the end, a sentence over all of it. But do not let the reframe flatten the record, because the record is genuinely unsettled. In 1975, Henry Kissinger wrote to President Ford that the intelligence exploitation of the recovered section had been of such significance that a second mission was worth mounting. 2 nuclear torpedoes came up. Russian analysts examining the physics of the break argued for years that a partial failure of that kind should have destroyed the pipe and the rig, and concluded that the Americans must therefore have recovered the whole thing and lied about it. The agency has never said, "That is not a gap in this account." That is the subject of it. Los Angeles, the 1st of August, 1974. Chuck Cannon goes to a hospital to see John Graham. 3 miles down and half a world away, Clementine's davits are closing under the wreck, and the lift is beginning that day. Graham has been out of the program since his diagnosis, and he will be dead the following morning, the 2nd of August, with the submarine hanging in the claw he never saw built. Cannon sits with him. Graham tells him to go and check on those damned Enterprise diesels. As Cannon remembered it, those were not the engines in the ship. He was on a different vessel by then. Cannon broke down. 1 man, 1 instruction, and nothing attached to it. The Hughes Glomar Explorer went to the breakers in 2015, and the hole in her bottom was cut up with the rest of her. The other one is still open. There is still no way to see inside it.